The Golden Vim, the War That Stole History. Chapter 1. The Librarian's Secret, the Thunder of Distant Guns, was a feint. Persistent tremor in the stones of Paris. It was August 1914, and the world was unspooling at the seams. But within the sacred, silent cavern of the Bibliothèque Nationale's rare manuscripts division, Eliane Moreau faced a more intimate, more terrifying end. The ancient oak of her desk was cool under her palms. Before her, bathed in the solitary pool of light from her green-shaded lamp, lay the cause of it all, the Vim of Hermes. The leather binding was cracked, the vellum pages whispering of centuries. To the uninitiated, it was a beautiful curio. A 13th century alchemical scroll dense with mystical diagrams and Latin so archaic it sang of forgotten tongues. To the kings and generals now bleeding Europe dry, it was a rumor that could win a war. The legendary Arcanum Aureum, a formula to transmute base matter into gold, an endless treasury in a single book. Buto Eliane Charles Ennui Cagot, Professor Alphonse Leblanc. The library's head curator, and the closest thing she had to her father, had died. The official report called it a tragic fall down the main staircase, his age and poor eyesight to blame. Eliane had found him, his body curled around an empty leather satchel. His last breath a ghost against her ear as she cradled him. The Vim, it is not gold, Eliane, it is a key, a terrible key. They are coming, guard it with your life. Do not let it cross the sea. Now they had a face, Dr. Klaus Vogel. For 3 months he had been a polite, almost invisible fixture in the reading room. A German academic, with impeccable credentials studying the influence of Arabic algebra on medieval French cartography. He was courteous, sharp, and utterly unmemorable. Until last Tuesday, she had caught him not at his usual desk, but standing before the great iron gate of the sale day trestles, the high-security vault. He wasn't looking at the lock. He was measuring the frame, his fingers not quite touching the metal, his head tilted in calculation. It was the posture of a surveyor, not a scholar. Candidat moment, reply some singular in purpose. The memory made her shiver. She had to move it. Leblanc, in his paranoia, had shown her the library's deepest secret, not a safe, but a silence. A forgotten ossuary, a space between walls built in the 1600s to hide Huguenot scholars. The entrance was behind a moving bookshelf in the sub-basement geology section, a place of dust and forgotten rock samples. Carefully, she wrapped the manuscript in a sheet of waxed canvas, then in plain, brown paper. It looked like a parcel of old periodicals. Slipping it into her sturdy leather portfolio, she extinguished her lamp. The library was closed, the great halls echoing with a tomb-like emptiness. Her footsteps were the only sound as she descended the grand staircase, past the spot where Leblanc's blood had been scrubbed from the marble. The lower levels were a different world, lit by flickering gas jets. The air grew cold and damp. The geology room smelled of dust and old stone. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she located the specific bookcase filled with treatises on Breton. Slatand felt for the hidden catch. With a soft, grating sigh, a section swung inward, revealing darkness and a breath of air older than the Revolution. She stepped inside, pulling the case closed behind her. Pitch blackness. She fumbled for the matches and candles she kept on a ledge. The flame sputtered, then caught illuminating a narrow passage, barely shoulder width, lined with brick. It ended at a small niche, no larger than a priest's confessional. This was it. She placed the wrapped manuscript on the rough shelf, covering it with a piece of rotted sacking. It was safe. For now, as she turned to leave, a sound froze her blood. Not from the library beyond, but from within the passage itself. A soft, deliberate scuff, then another. Someone was in the ossuary with her. The candle shook in her hand, casting wild shadows. "Who is there?" she whispered, her voice swallowed by the bricks. No answer, only the sound of breathing, slow and controlled, from the darkness ahead, between her and the only exit. "Dr. Vogel?" She tried, desperation edging her tone. A low chuckle echoed softly. It was not Vogel's voice. This one was rougher, tinged with a Parisian gutter accent. "The doctor, he sends his compliments, mademoiselle. But he is a man of letters. I am a man of results." A shape detached itself from the gloom. He was big, his coat straining over broad shoulders, a cap pulled low. His face was in shadow, but the candlelight glinted off the knuckle duster on his right hand. "The book," he said simply, taking a step forward. "The old man died for it. Don't be stupid." A lion's mind raced. The portfolio in her hand was empty, a decoy. The real treasure was at her back. She had one advantage. He thought she was carrying it. And he thought she was just a librarian. She let her voice tremble, shrinking into herself. "Please, don't hurt me." "Itegate, sir." "Take it." She thrust the leather portfolio toward him. A greedy light flashed in his eyes. He reached for it. As his fingers brushed the leather, Eliane moved. Years of navigating tight archive stacks, of carrying heavy folios, a strong, balanced cry to fight him. She dropped the portfolio, and as his eyes followed it, she drove the heel of her palm upward, not at his face, but at the candle in her other hand. The flame shot toward him, a shocking spear of light, batting at it. In that second of distraction, Eliane turned and ran, not for the exit he blocked, but back down the narrow passage, deeper into the ossuary's unknown heart. The darkness swallowed her just as she heard his enraged snarl and the sound of his heavy boots giving chase. The hunt was on, and it was happening in the belly of history itself. The thunder of distant guns was a faint, persistent tremor in the stones of Paris. It was August 1914, and the world was unspooling at the seams. But within the sacred, silent cavern of the Bibliothèque Nationale's rare manuscripts division, Eliane Moreau faced a more intimate, more terrifying end. The ancient oak of her desk was cool under her palms. Before her, bathed in the solitary pool of light from her green-shaded lamp, lay the cause of it all, the Vim of Hermes. The leather binding was cracked, the vellum pages whispering of centuries. To the uninitiated, it was a beautiful curio. A 13th century alchemical scroll dense with mystical diagrams and Latin so archaic it sang of forgotten tongues. To the kings and generals now bleeding Europe dry, it was a rumor that could win a war. The legendary Arcanum Aureum, a formula to transmute base matter into gold, an endless treasury in a single book. Buto Eliane Charles, Onui Cageo, Professor Alphonse Lablin. The library's head curator, and the closest thing she had to a father, had died. The official report called it a tragic fall down the main staircase, his age and poor eyesight to blame. Eliane had found him, his body curled around an empty leather satchel, his last breath a ghost against her ear as she cradled him, the Vim. It is not gold, Eliane. It is a key, a terrible key. They are coming. Guard it with your life. Do not let it cross the sea. Now, they had a face. Dr. Klaus Vogel. For 3 months, he had been a polite, almost invisible fixture in the reading room. A German academic with impeccable credentials studying the influence of Arabic algebra on medieval French cartography. He was courteous, sharp, and utterly unmemorable. Until last Tuesday, she had caught him, not at his usual desk, but standing before the great iron gate of the Sale Day Tressors, the high-security vault. He wasn't looking at the lock. He was measuring the frame, his fingers not quite touching the metal, his head tilted in calculation. It was the posture of a surveyor, not a scholar. Kein dat moment, the câble some singular, in purpose. The memory made her shiver. She had to move it. Leblanc, in his paranoia, had shown her the library's deepest secret, not a safe, but a silence. A forgotten ossuary, a space between walls built in the 1600s to hide Huguenot scholars. The entrance was behind a moving bookshelf in the sub-basement geology section, a place of dust and forgotten rock samples. Carefully, she wrapped the manuscript in a sheet of waxed canvas, then in plain brown paper. It looked like a parcel of old periodicals. Slipping it into her sturdy leather portfolio, she extinguished her lamp. The library was closed, the great halls echoing with a tomb-like emptiness. Her footsteps were the only sound as she descended the grand staircase, past the spot where Leblanc's blood had been scrubbed from the marble. The lower levels were a different world, lit by flickering gas jets. The air grew cold and damp. The geology room smelled of dust and old stone. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she located the specific. Bookcase filled with treatises on Breton slate and felt for the hidden catch. With a soft, grating sigh, a section swung inward, revealing darkness and a breath of air older than the Revolution. She stepped inside, pulling the case closed behind her. Pitch blackness. She fumbled for the matches and candles she kept on a ledge. The flame sputtered, then caught, illuminating a narrow passage barely shoulder width, lined with brick. It ended at a small niche, no larger than a priest's confessional. This was it. She placed the wrapped manuscript on the rough shelf, covering it with a piece of rotted sacking. It was safe. For no. As she turned to leave, a sound froze her blood. Not from the library beyond, but from within the passage itself. A soft, deliberate scuff, then another. Someone was in the ossuary with her. The candle shook in her hand, casting wild shadows. "Who is there?" she whispered, her voice swallowed by the bricks. No ossuary. Only the sound of breathing, slow and controlled, from the darkness ahead, between her and the only exit. Dr. Vogel. She tried, desperation edging her tone. A low chuckle echoed softly. It was not Vogel's voice. This one was rougher, tinged with a Parisian gutter accent. "The doctor, he sends his compliments, Mademoiselle, bonne lettres première maman off. Result." A shape detached itself from the gloom. He was big, his coat straining over broad shoulders, a cap pulled low. His face was in shadow, but the candlelight glinted off the knuckle duster on his right hand. "The book," he said simply, taking a step forward. "The old man died for it. Don't be stupid." A lion's mind raced. The portfolio in her hand was empty, a decoy. The real treasure was at her back. She had one advantage. He thought she was carrying it. And he thought she was just a librarian. She let her voice tremble, shrinking into herself. "Please, don't hurt me. It's here. Take it." She thrust the leather portfolio toward him. A greedy light flashed in his eyes. He reached for it. As his fingers brushed the leather, Eliane moved. Years of navigating tight archive stacks, of carrying heavy folios strong, balancé de corps. She didn't try to fight him. She dropped the portfolio, and as his eyes followed it, she drove the heel of her palm upward, not at his face, but at the candle in her other hand. The flame shot toward him, a sudden, shocking spear of light and heat. He flivly, batting at it. In that second of distraction, Eliane turned and ran, not for the exit he blocked, but back down the narrow passage, deeper, into the ossuary's unknown heart. Salope. He snarled. The sound of his heavy boots pounding the brick floor followed her. Panic was a live wire in her chest. She held the guttering candle ahead. The light, revealing only a few feet of passage at a time. The air grew colder, damper. Leblanc's words came back. "It twists like a worm, my dear." It was never meant to be a refuge, only a delay. She had never ventured beyond the niche. The passage sloped downward. She could hear him, closer now, his breathing labored but relentless. Her shoe caught on an uneven brick, and she stumbled, the candle flying from her hand. It hit the wet floor with a hiss and died, absolute, suffocating darkness. She pressed herself against the wall, trying to silence her gasps. The footsteps stopped. "You are in a maze, little mouse." His voice echoed, bouncing off the walls, directionless. "And I know this maze. It was a bluff. He couldn't know it. No one did, but he was listening." She forced herself to breathe through her nose, in and out, silently. She began to creep forward, one hand on the slick, cold wall. The brickwork changed under her fingertips. It became rougher, older. She felt an opening, an archway. She slipped through it. A new smell hit her, stale water, rot, the mineral tongue of deep earth, the sound of dripping. She was no longer in a brick passage, but in a rough-hewn tunnel, a sewer, a catacomb spur. She didn't know, but it was a way out. She moved faster, urgency overriding fear. The floor was uneven, sometimes submerged, in an inch of icy water. Behind her, she heard a curse and a crash. He had found the archway, in the dark, less gracefully. A faint, grey light appeared ahead, not daylight, but a phosphorescent gloom. It was a grated opening high on a wall, leading to a cellar or a lower street level. Moonlight filtered through. She scrambled toward it. The grate was rusted but solid. She pulled at it, but it didn't budge. His footsteps were loud now, splashing through water. Desperate, she looked around. A piece of rusted iron pipe lay in the debris. She snatched it up, wedged a corner of the grate, pushed with her weight, le verra gignit. With a shriek of corroded metal, one side bent outward. She squeezed through the opening, tearing her dress and scraping her skin. She tumbled out into a sunken area, a coal cellar for a nearby building. She was out. Above her, through a sidewalk grating, she could see the cobblestones of a deserted Parisian street, blacked out under the threat of Zeppelins. She didn't look back. She pulled herself up, climbed the cellar steps, and emerged into the cool night air. Paris was a city of shadows, every window shuttered, every light extinguished. She was alone, filthy, and hunted. The manuscript was safe in its brick womb, but she was exposed. And she knew, with a certainty that chilled her more than the tunnel's damp, that the man in the ossuary was not the only hunter. Dr. Vogel was out there. En d'auteur. She had the key to the secret, and now the whole world was her lock. Edward, reed hunched, his shoulders against the Channel spray, feeling less like a captain in His Majesty's army and more like a drowned rat who had borrowed an ill-fitting suit. Olaf E. civilian, terribly a constant, pet annoyance, beneath the monumental weight of his real task. Across the heaving grey water, the coast of France was a smudge of impending chaos. In his mind, he rehearsed the lies. Edward Reed, curator of medieval texts, British Museum. Here, on a cultural preservation exchange. Deeply concerned for our shared heritage, the cover was solid, burnished by genuine expertise. Before the war, it had been his life. Now, it was a weapon. His true orders, memorized and then burned in a Whitehall fireplace, were etched in his mind with cold clarity. Locate and secure manuscript designated Prévin Liaison Moreau, Eliane. Archiviste, Bibliothèque Nationale, Aswanenessere. The final two words were the poison pill. Utilize as necessary. It meant she was a tool, expendable. He'd seen the file photo. A serious face, intelligent eyes staring out from a world of quiet parchment. He was to walk into her life, a whirlwind of deceit and violence, and utilize her. The ferry groaned as it docked at Calais. The port was a bedlam of khaki and anxiety shouting sergeants. Bleating sheep in pens destined for the front, stacks of ominous wooden crates. Edward moved through it with practiced invisibility, his academics stoop perfect. At the customs desk, a harried French official stamped his papers without a glance. He was through. The train to Paris was a slow, somber beast, crammed with soldiers singing bravado-filled songs that couldn't mask the fear in their eyes. Edward secured a corner seat in a second-class compartment and pretended to sleep, observing, through slitted eyelids, a priest reading a breviary, a merchant sweating over a ledger, a young couple, the man in uniform holding hands so tightly their knuckles were white. Ordinary lives, fractured. It was as the train jerked into motion that he felt it. Not a sound, but a shift in pressure. The compartment door slid open and a man in a heavy, dark coat entered, murmuring apologies as he squeezed onto the bench beside the merchant. He was broad, with the weathered complexion of a sailor or a laborer. He didn't look at Edward. But when the train entered a tunnel, plunging them into roaring blackness for a full minute, Edward felt a hand swift, precise dart into his inner breast pocket. He didn't move. He didn't breathe. The man was a professional, light flooded back. The man was settling himself, adjusting his coat. No one else had noticed a thing. Edward waited a count of 30, then casually felt for his pocket. The sealed letter from the museum, his official introduction to the bibliothèque, was gone. In its place was a small, sharp-edged square of paper. His blood ran cold. This was no petty thief. He waited until he visited the malodorous lavatory at the end of the rocking carriage. Locking the door, he unfolded the paper under the feeble bulb. 2 words. Typewritten in stark, black ink. Tell her nothing. No signature, no context. It was a command, or a warning, carved from pure ambiguity. Who had sent it? A friend in London's Secret Service Bureau, warning him the French archivist was compromised. Or was it from the other side German intelligence, playing him, aiming to isolate him from his only potential ally? He stared at the message until the letters blurred. The mission, which had seemed a clear, if dirty task, now spiraled into a labyrinth. Paris was no longer just an objective. It was a stage set with trapdoors, and every actor wore a mask. Eliane Moreau was at the center. Was she the guardian he was to protect, the asset he was to use? Or was she the spider at the heart of the web? He flushed the paper down the foul toilet and watched it swirl away. The decision was made for him. He could not trust the directive from London. If its countermand could be stolen so easily, he would have to trust his own eyes, his own instinct. And his instinct told him the warning, whoever it was from, was correct. Knowledge was the most dangerous currency of all. He would tell her nothing of his real purpose. He would be Edward Reed, the fussy curator, and he would watch. He would learn what she knew, and he would decide for himself when, or if, to act. The train pulled into the Gare, du Nord under a twilight sky the color of a fresh bruise. Paris was different. The bravado of London was absent here, replaced by a tense, brittle silence. Sandbags were piled around public buildings. Posters of a stern, pointing Uncle Sam were pasted over cheerful cafe advertisements. The city was holding its breath. He took a room in a small, shabby-genteel hotel near the Latin Quarter, the kind of place where academics on a budget stayed. His room overlooked a narrow courtyard. He methodically swept it for listening devices, a new, paranoid skill he'd acquired and found nothing. He unpacked his few things, his hand brushing against the cold, hard metal of the Webley revolver hidden in a false bottom of his suitcase. A soldier's tool, not a scholar's. The next morning, he presented himself at the Bibliothèque Nationale. The grand building felt like a fortress under siege. The usual scholars were gone, replaced by a skeleton staff and an air of grim purpose. He gave his name at the main desk, asking for Mademoiselle Moreau. The clerk, an elderly man with trembling hands, peered at him. "Moreau, she is not here today. She sent a message. She is unwell." A lie. Edward could taste it in the air. "I see. A great pity. We had a scheduled consultation on the Carolingian minuscule. Perhaps tomorrow." The clerk shrugged, a gesture of profound helplessness. "Perhaps. The world is unwell, monsieur. Who can say?" As Edward turned to leave, feigning disappointment, his eye caught a figure standing in the shadow of a marble column near the entrance. It was the man from the train. The broad-shouldered man in the dark coat. He was not looking at Edward. He was watching the clerk, and he was waiting. Edward didn't break stride. He walked out into the Parisian morning, the autumn sun doing little to warm him. Eliane Moreau was not sick. She was missing. The hunters were already inside the library. And he, the man sent to secure the prize, was hopelessly behind. Caught between a warning he couldn't trust and a woman he couldn't find. The mission had begun in earnest, and he was already lost in the fog of war. Chapter 3. The Chemist's Equation, Berlin, October 1914. The air in Dr. Klaus Vogel's laboratory was a sterile mix of carbolic acid, ozone from the electrical generators, and the faint, metallic scent of ambition. Here, in the heart of Berlin's Imperial Institute for Chemical Science, the thunder of distant artillery was replaced by the hum of transformers and the precise click of glass on glass. On the surface, his work was a patriotic endeavor, improving synthetic nitrate yields for artillery shells. A vital, if grim, contribution to the war effort. His superiors were pleased. They saw only the obedient servant of the Reich. They did not see the other notebook. It lay open on a clean slate bench, separate from his official log. Its pages were not filled with formulae for explosives, but with elegantly copied symbols from a single, grainy photograph, page 47 of the Vim of Hermes. The photograph, obtained at great cost and risk from a turnkey in the French library, was frustratingly incomplete. It showed a complex diagramma series of interlocking circles and triangles, annotated in a cipher that was not quite Latin, not quite Greek. To the occultists in the Thule Society who clamored for his findings, it was a mystical map to the philosopher's stone. To Vogel, it was a puzzle of a different order. His hypothesis, formed over sleepless weeks, was heretical. He believed the manuscript was not alchemy at all, but early proto-chemistry, a coded record of experimental reactions and material properties lost to history. The gold it promised was not auric metal, but knowledge that could leapfrog industrial processes, create new alloys, synthesize compounds that would make Germany untouchable. It was not magic, it was science waiting to be reborn. This belief was his compass, his justification. A sharp rap at the laboratory door broke his concentration. Before he could answer, Major Strasser entered. He was a man of the new breed, from the Nachrichtenbüro, the military intelligence service. His boots were too shiny, his uniform too perfect, his manner a blade sheathed in civility. Herr Dr. Vogel, progress. On the nitrate series, significant. Major, yield is up 18%, Vogel replied, smoothly closing his private notebook. He gestured to his official work. Strasser's eyes, pale and assessing, did not follow the gesture. They scanned the lab, lingering on the locked drawer where Vogel kept the photograph. Excellent. The fatherland is grateful, but we are here to discuss your other project. The French manuscript. Vogel kept his face neutral. The source material remains elusive. The primary custodian, the archivist Moreau, has disappeared. Our asset in Paris reports the physical location is currently unknown. The asset, Strasser said, his voice dropping to a conversational tone that was more threatening than a shout. A brute, reliable for force, not for finesse. He failed to extract the archivist. She evaded him in the library's undercroft. He let the statement hang, a demonstration of his own omniscience. Vogel had not been told of the failure. This no lull, Herr Doktor, it is orect action. You are to proceed to Paris, Vogel's heart stuttered. Major, my work here can be managed by your assistants. Your expertise is now required in the field. To authenticate the document once it is acquired, to ensure no decoys are accepted. Strasser placed a slim dossier on the bench. You are attached to a diplomatic courier service leaving for Switzerland tomorrow. From there, you will enter France through neutral channels. Your contacts in Paris will provide support. It was an order, seamless and inescapable. Vogel was being conscripted into the shadow war. Strasser turned to leave, then paused at the door. There is one more tool for your kit. He nodded to a subordinate outside, who brought in a small, sealed steel case. Strasser opened it. Nesaizen Gregor I12 items on next to it. A small glaclear visco liquid. Glindes indondabder, lablight, strassese. The ampule contains a somnifrant of your own design, I believe, compound V7, fast-acting, untraceable by any post-mortem available to the French. A scientific solution to a practical problem. Vogel stared at the poison. He had developed V7 years ago as a theoretical exercise, a study in neurotoxic alkaloids. He had published a paper on its potential antidotes. Now it had been weaponized. The pure research of his mind had been distilled into a tool for silent murder. Use them, strassese. His final words identical to the ones in Edward Reed's orders, an eerie echo across the lines. The Vim is a strategic asset. Its guardians are enemy combatants. The morality is clear. Bring us the key, Doctor. Open the door to the future. The door clicked shut behind him. Vogel was alone with the tools of his new trade. He picked up the ampule, holding it to the light. It was perfect, a marvel of chemical engineering. He thought Eliane Moreau. He had read her sole published paper on the acidic decay of iron gall ink in 14th century manuscripts. It was meticulous, insightful. A mind that respected process, that sought to preserve. A mind not unlike his own. A profound dissonance settled in the sterile room. The equation he now faced was not chemical, but moral. On one side, duty, country, scientific progress for the Reich. On the other, the life of a fellow scholar, the sanctity of knowledge for its own sake. The ampule in his hand represented a terrible efficiency. It would solve the problem of the Guardian, but would it corrupt the very knowledge he sought to acquire? Could a truth born from such an act ever be pure? He placed the ampule back in the case, closing the lid with a soft, final click. He would go to Paris. He would find the manuscript. But as he looked at his hands, the hands of a scientist, now designated the hands of an assassin, he no longer knew what he would do when he found its keeper. The no longer État d'Affaires, and for a time Dr. Klaus Vogel Amonenspatz, could not solve for X in the equation of his own conscience. Chapter 4. The Safe House, Paris, October 1914. The safe house was not safe. This was a lion's first, certain thought as she stood dripping on the frayed rug in its center. It was a single room, perched like a diseased tooth above a shuttered bakery in the 11th arrondissement. The air smelled of stale yeast, dust, and a deeper, more persistent odor of damp and neglect. A narrow bed, a toast knife chair, one window, covered by a sheet of sackcloth, looked out onto a lightless alley. The man who had brought her here, who called himself Captain Edward Reed, moved with a tense, efficient silence. He had found her 2 nights after her flight from the ossuary. She had been sleeping fitfully in the waiting room of a closed medical clinic, her mind fraying from exhaustion and fear. He had not startled her. He had simply sat beside her, as if waiting for the same phantom doctor, and Spolo, flawless friend, Mademoiselle Moreau. Professor Leblanc spoke of you with great respect. He said, if ever the library's heart was in danger, I should find you. The use of Leblanc's name had disarmed her more than any weapon. He had shown her a letter, now stolen on the train, but whose seal and phrasing she vaguely recognized from the museum's correspondence. He was calm, scholarly, his concern for the cultural heritage seeming genuine. He offered shelter. In her desperate fatigue, she had accepted. Now, in the grim reality of this room, doubt rushed in. He had returned from the Stro, Isfas Grim. There were men watching the end of the alley. They are not police. They move like soldiers, but in civilian clothes. Your men? She asked, her voice flat. She still held the iron pipe from the sewer, now cleaned, leaning against her leg under the table. He looked at her directly for the first time since their arrival. His eyes were a tired gray, the eyes of a man who had seen to many archives and, she suspected, other things. No, they are not my men. I believe they are the same men who are looking for you, for the manuscript. And how did they find this place? She kept her gaze steady, watching for the flicker of a lie. I don't know, he said, and she sensed truth in his frustration. This location was, provided, it should have been secure. He ran a hand through his hair, the gesture betraying a fatigue that matched her own. They are patient. They are waiting for something, for us to lead them, perhaps. He was hiding something. She could feel the gaps in his story, the careful omissions. He was a curator, yet he had spotted professional watchers in a dark alley. He spoke of heritage, yet his body carried a coiled readiness that had nothing to do with books. You are not what you say you are, Captain Reed, she stated, not accusingly, but as a fact, and I am not a fool. The man in the ossuary was a thug. The men outside are professionals. You are something else in between. Why are you really here? Is it for the Vim or for me? He was silent for a long moment. The only sound was the distant skitter of a rat in the walls. He seemed to be weighing her, deciding. He had been warned to tell her nothing. But the safe house was compromised. The watchers were at the door, and this fierce, grimy woman with the iron pipe had just called his bluff. The manuscript, he finally said, the words sounding like a confession. My government believes it is a threat to the balance of the war. My orders are to secure it. He did not look away. You are its guardian. My orders regarding you are less clear. Utilize as necessary. The words hung unspoken in the fetid air. Eliane absorbed this. It was cleaner than lies. A brutal, honest objective. And you? What do you believe? This surprised him. He was not used to being asked for his own belief. He thought of the warning note, the faceless sender. He thought of the ampulla of poison he had found hidden in Reed's shaving kit when he had searched the room. Earlier, a discovery that had frozen his blood. It was not British issue. It was a ghost from another lab. I believe, he said slowly, that Leblanc was killed for it. That you are hunted for it. That makes it worth protecting. From everyone, it was not full truth, but it was enough. A fragile truce, pero. It is not in the library, she said, the first real piece of information she offered. It is hidden in the city's bones. Only I know where. If you help me keep it from those men outside, and from the German, Vogel, I will take you to it, not to give to you. To show you it is safe. Then we decide what must be done. It was her offer, her terms. She was not a resource to be utilized. She was a partner in a desperate pact. Edward saw the steel in her. She had survived the ossuary, the sewers, 2 nights on the run. She was more than an archivist. She was a survivor. Before he could answer, a new sound cut through the quiet. Not from the alley, but from the building itself, a creak on the stair. Not the careless tread of the baker returning, but a slow, deliberate step, then a pause. Tenanote. Someone was on the stairs. Someone who knew how to be quiet, and was failing only because the ancient wood was betraying them. Edward's hand went inside his coat. A lion's fingers tightened on the cold iron pipe. The footsteps stopped outside the door. A moment of absolute silence pressed against their ears. Then a knock. 3 soft, distinct taps. It was not the battering ram of the ossuary thug. It was polite, precise, tearing to the door, gesturing for Eliane to stand to the side. "Who is it?" he called, his voice strained. The answer came in a calm, educated voice, lightly accented. "It is Dr. Klaus Vogel. I believe we have a mutual problem to discuss. And I believe I am being followed by the same gentleman in the alley. May I suggest we talk quickly?" Inside the room, 2 hunters and their prey looked at one another. The world had shrunk to a single door. The German alchemist was on the other side, offering not violence, but parley. And the watchers outside were now hunters closing in on them all. The safe house had become a trap, and the only way out might be through the man they feared most. Chapter 5: The Unholy Alliance. The 3 of them stood in a tense triangle in the center of the damp room, the dynamic shifting with each strained breath. Dr. Klaus Vogel looked absurdly out of place. His overcoat was finely tailored but damp at the shoulders from the drizzle outside. He held a leather doctor's bag, not a weapon. His spectacles were slightly fogged. He was the picture of a harassed academic, not a predator. Yet his presence was a seismic event. Edward had his revolver drawn, held low but unmistakable. Eliane kept her iron pipe, her knuckles white. She stared at Vogel, the phantom from the reading room, now made flesh in this squalid safe house. He met her gaze and gave a small, weary nod of recognition. "You have approximately 7 minutes, Vogel said, his French precise. He set his bag on the table with a soft thud. The 2 men at the north end of the alley are French military intelligence. Deuxième bureau, Compton de Line Bar, the bakery door, is the one who pursued you, mademoiselle. He is employed by a subsidiary of my government. He is less competent, but brutal. They are not working together. They are watching each other as much as they are watching this building, a stalemate. But it will not last. Why are you here?" Edward's voice was a tight wire. The gun did not waver. "Because I am a pragmatist, Captain Reed, or should I say, curator." Vogel's eyes flicked to Edward's face, a hint of cold amusement there. "My orders are to secure the manuscript. Your orders, I presume, are the same. We are at an impasse. The French state, it seems, also has an interest. And the brood outside represents a faction in Berlin that sees this as a simple smash and grab. This," he gestured around the room, "is where we all lose." Eliane found her voice. It was steadier than she felt. You killed Professor LeBlanc. Vogel's face tightened, a genuine flicker of something regret crossing his features. I did not. I admired his work. His death was ordered by the man downstairs. A blunt instrument for a problem deemed to require blunt force. I argued against it. He opened his doctor's bag. Both Edward and Eliane flinched, but he withdrew only a folded sheaf of papers, chemical, formulae, diagrams copied from the grainy photograph. He spread them on the table next to the knife scars. This is what they think they want, a recipe for gold. Alchemical nonsense. He pointed a long finger at a complex symbol. But this, here, and this notation, this is not mysticism. This is a description of a catalytic reaction using a mercury-gold amalgam under specific thermal conditions. It is not about making gold. It is about understanding gold. Its molecular bonds, its reactivity. The knowledge in your manuscript, Mademoiselle, is not a treasury. It is a textbook. A dangerous, advanced textbook that could lead to discoveries in metallurgy, energy, chemistry that would make the current war look like a Stone Age skirmish. The silence that followed was different now. It was not just fear, but the silence of a revelation. Vogel was not a treasure hunter. He was a scholar, just as he had always appeared, but a scholar in service to a war machine. You want it for Germany, Edward stated. I wanted it for science, Vogel corrected, a sharp edge of frustration in his voice. But I am not a fool. I know whose passport I carry. Now, however, I see a third path. If my brutish colleague downstairs gets it, it will be whisked to Berlin and placed in the hands of idiots who will waste it. If the Duim Bureau gets it, it becomes a bargaining chip in a war, likely lost in some vault. If you, Captain, get it, it becomes a British secret. The knowledge dies, again, in another nation's archive. And your solution? Eliane asked, her mind racing over his diagrams, seeing them now with new eyes. We remove it from the board. Together, Vogel looked at each of them. The three of us. The only three people in this city, perhaps in this war, who understand what it truly is. We retrieve it from where you have hidden it, Mademoiselle. We secure it, not for a nation, but from all nations. We create a copy, a false trail, and we ensure the original disappears. It was audacious. It was likely a trap. But it was the first plan that acknowledged the value of the thing itself, beyond its price in blood or power. Why would we ever trust you? Edward's finger rested on the trigger guard. You should not, Vogel said simply. Trust is impossible, but mutual interest is not. I have a safe passage out of France through Switzerland. I can get the manuscript to a neutral repository, the Vatican Archives, a university in Stockholm. Somewhere it can be studied when this madness ends. You have the location, and Captain Reed, you have the tactical skill to evade the men outside. Alone, each of us fails. Together, we have a chance to save it. A heavy thud came from the floor below, a door being forced. The stalemate was over. The brute was making his move. They are done waiting, Vogel said, his calm finally cracking into urgency. He reached into his bag again. This time, Faudlaire el ditep compundvis et avapur. In close quarters, it will incapacitate in seconds, a non-lethal option. My alternative to a bullet. He looked at Edward's gun. We will need both. Eliane made the decision. She looked from the English soldier with his haunted eyes to the German scientist with his desperate plan. Both were hunters. Both were, in their own ways, protectors. And she was the keeper of the key. Leblanc's final wish echoed, "Do not let it cross the sea." "The manuscript is in the crypt of St. Julien-le-Pauvre," she said quickly. "The old church by the river, in a cavity behind the tomb of Bishop Gilles. It was consecrated ground. Leblanc thought no one would profane it." Another crash from downstairs, shouting in guttural French. "Then we go," Edward said, his soldier's instinct taking over. He shoved his revolver into his coat. "Vogel, you lead. You know the man. Talk your way past him, Eliane, behind me. If this goes wrong—" "It has already gone wrong," Vogel said, pocketing the ampule. "Now we try to make it right." He opened the door. The landing was empty, but the sounds of a struggle grunts, the smash of pottery came from the bakery below. The brute was dealing with the baker. Vogel moved down the stairs with a startling grace. Edward and Eliane followed. The scene in the bakery was chaos. The brutish man had the elderly baker in a headlock, flour dusting them both like ghosts. He saw Vogel and snarled, "Doctor." The woman, "Where is?" Vogel did not hesitate. He uncorked the ampule and dashed it onto the flour-covered floor at the man's feet. There was no dramatic smoke, only a faint, sweet smell like almonds. The brute took one sharp, surprised breath. His eyes widened, then fluttered. His grip slackened, and he slid to the floor, collapsing like a sack of grain beside the stunned baker. "Run, Vogel commanded." They burst out of the bakery's rear door into the misty alley. To the north, two figures in dark coats broke from their cover, shouting, "The deuxième bureau." The unholy alliance of keeper, soldier, and scientist took off into the labyrinthine streets of Paris. The precious secret of St. Julien-le-Pauvre, their only goal. And all the powers of the warring world now united in pursuit of them. Chapter 6. The True Treasure, Paris, November 1914. The rain fell on Paris as a fine, persistent shroud, washing the grit from the cobblestones but doing nothing to cleanse the city of fear. Inside the ancient, cold crypt of St. Julien-le-Pauvre, three figures huddled in a pocket of stillness, the only light a single guttering candle stolen from a votive rack upstairs. A lion's fingers, numb with cold and tension, found the hidden mechanism. A soft click echoed in the stone space as a section of the tomb of Bishop Gilles slid back, revealing a cavity. The waxed canvas parcel was exactly as she had left it. She lifted it out with a reverence that bordered on prayer, the weight of it in her hands feeling like the weight of the centuries. They did not open it there. The crypt was not a library. They took it to the only place left, the attic of a sympathetic bookseller, a friend of Leblanc's, near the Sorbonne. The man asked no questions, his eyes full of a sorrow that understood the value of secrets. In the low, timbered space, surrounded by the smell of old paper and Parisian rain, they finally unwrapped the Vim of Hermes. Under the steady lamplight, Vogel took charge. This was his domain. With meticulous care, he turned the vellum pages, his breath catching at the sight of the original diagrams. Edward stood guard at the small, dirty window, his revolver a silent sentinel against the world outside. Eliane watched Vogel's face, seeing the scholar eclipse the agent completely. For an hour, he was silent, tracing lines of text with a fingertip, muttering in Latin, Greek, and German. Then he sat back, removing his spectacles to pinch the bridge of his nose. A strange sound escaped him, not a laugh, not a sigh, but something weary and profound. It is as I suspected, and yet. More, he said, his voice thick. It is not a guide to making gold. It is a treatise on failure. Els onze nordesvange of meta. He pointed to the most complex diagram, the one from his photograph. See this? De kalitze san moves. In allegorical terms, an attempt to fuse certain purified metals under a specific spectrum of lighter primitive. Brilliant attempt at photochemistry. It failed. But the record of how it failed, the precise measurements of heat, light, and residue, this is the treasure. This failed experiment contains insights that could shortcut a decade of modern research. He looked up at Eliane, his eyes alight with pure, unadulterated discovery. Your Professor Leblanc was right. It is a key, but not to a vault of gold. It is a key to a door in the human mind. A door marked what if. Edward turned from the window, his soldier's pragmatism cutting through the scholarly awe. So what do we do with it? Your plan, Vogel, neutral ground. Vogel nodded, his moment of transcendence passing into grim purpose. We make the copy. A convincing one. We leave a trail of alchemical hints pointing to Basel, to a private collector. Let the hunters chase the ghost. The original, he looked at Eliane, must go where no government can claim it. It must become a myth again. Eliane knew. Leblanc had told her of a place, a dream of his. The library of the Benedictines in Mont Saint-Michel, she whispered. It is cut off by the tides. It is beyond borders. The abbot there was his friend. He would keep it, not as a secret, but as a trust. It was decided. They worked through the night. Vogel, with a chemist's steady hand, created the forgery, using period inks and carefully aging the paper with controlled chemical washes. He inserted deliberate, tantalizing errors enough to feel authentic, not enough to be useless. It was a masterpiece of misdirection. Eliane sewed the original into the lining of an old leather trunk, alongside a letter explaining everything addressed to the abbot. Edward arranged, through the last of his clandestine contacts, for a trusted monastic courier to take the trunk on a pilgrimage route to the coast. As Dunbrook, Greandtin Bexel, their work done. The copy, wrapped and ready to be discovered by the Douim Bureau, sat on the table. The original was on its way to become a silent prayer in a stone library surrounded by the sea. They looked at each other, the French archivist, the English soldier spy, the German chemist. The war still raged outside, a machine that would grind on for years, consuming millions. They had not stopped it. They had not changed its course. But, in the heart of its chaos, they had saved a singular, fragile piece of human wonder from being consumed by its fire. What now? Edward asked, his voice hollow with exhaustion. Vogel picked up his doctor's bag. Inside was the forgery. Now, I walk to the German embassy. I will be hailed as a hero who recovered the great secret. I will buy my way back to Berlin with this lie. Et gavatin smile. Perhaps I can use that influence to save a few lives. to divert some resources, a small counterweight. He turned to Eliev. Mademoiselle Moreau, you were a worthy guardian. Thank you for protecting the truth. To Edward, he simply offered a hand. After a moment's hesitation, Edward took it, a soldier's grip, brief and firm. No words were needed. They had been enemies, then reluctant allies, and now they would be memories to one another. Vogel left first, melting into the morning mist, a ghost returning to the machine. Edward looked at Eliane. I have to go back. My war is not over. I know, she said. She did not ask him to stay. The world did not allow for such things. The library will be watched, he said. You can't go back there. I have a friend in Lyon. I will go there. I will wait, and I will remember one notebook. It was Leblanc's, a copy of the key pages, not for your government. For you, for when this is over, and scholars can be scholars again, he took it, a greater treasure than any medal. Then he, too, was gone. Eliane stood alone in the silent shop. She picked up the candle and extinguished it. The chase was over. The Vim was safe. The hunters would chase a phantom to Basel, and the great powers would forever wonder about the lost secret of gold. But she knew the true secret. It was not in a formula or a reaction. It was in the choice they had made. In the middle of history's most violent grab for power, 3 people from 3 warring nations had chosen, for a moment, to protect a beautiful failure instead of claiming a weapon. They had chosen the future of knowledge over the advantage of the day. She stepped out into the rain-washed Paris street. The city was grey, hungry, afraid. But as she walked towards the station, towards an uncertain future, she carried a quiet, unstealable truth. Some wars were not fought over land or gold, but over the soul of what we preserve. And in the crypt, in the attic, in a trunk bound for a tidal island, they had won. And so, the story of the Golden Vim fades into the mist of history. A whispered legend of World War I. The real treasure was never gold, but the fragile light of human curiosity, guarded in the darkest of times. We hope you were swept away by this tale of suspense, sacrifice, and secret alliances. If this story made you think and feel and wonder, then please do us a great service. Subscribe to FunnyFun Audiobook Gala. Give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who loves history, mystery, and the untold stories between the lines of our past. There are countless more tales waiting in the archives of time, and we can't wait to bring them to you. Until next time, keep listening and keep imagining. Goodbye.